Ok, test. C'est bon. C'est bon. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I hope you had a nice rest. So it's 10 a.m. in Dakar, and we are about to start last day of the Africa Arena, the 5th edition of the Africa Arena. So don't forget to recommend to your friends, to your colleagues, to your people the Africa Arena Wired app so people can follow you all around the world. There's an app that is dedicated for this. You can also watch it on the Africa Arena website. So, as yesterday, we will have keynotes, panels, and pitches today. And so we are going to start, and after that we'll have an award ceremony that will be directed by the Minister, Papa Amadou Sarr. So the first keynote of the day will be presented by Adenike from Future Africa, and the topic is building an African capital stack. So if Adenike is here, we can start.
Good morning, everybody. Mic check. I came going to have the pleasure of listening to me tell you about what now is my life's work, building an African capital stack. And, you know, this is a topic that I'm very, where can I place this, please? That I'm very passionate and excited about. But before we go into all of that, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Adenike Sheriff. I work as principal at Future Africa, and that just means I'm in charge of finding amazing companies for us to invest in, as well as managing our community of co-investors, because we have a very unique way of delivering capital to innovators. It's really a pleasure to be here. And he was originally supposed to deliver this speech, but as God would have it, I'm doing it in his place, and hopefully I make him proud, fingers crossed. So let's get right into it. Who are we? You know, who we are at Future Africa. Our mission, essentially, is to build an African future where purpose and prosperity is within everyone's reach. The world has changed. The major way to create wealth and equality for everybody now is actually this. With this, you get access to the whole world. You can build a company. You can buy shares in a company. And, you know, we need to ensure that Africans are part of this revolution that is sweeping the whole world. So we believe the obstacle is the way. Africa has many problems, but therein lies the greatest opportunity to build our collective future. And we're committed to supporting innovators to build this future by solving Africa's most difficult challenges. What is our why? We want to build an Africa where prosperity and purpose is within everyone's reach. How do we do this? By empowering innovators through capital, coaching, and, you know, having a community where they can learn what they need to do to scale their companies into billion-dollar businesses. And what is our promise? Our promise is to turn Africa's challenges into global business opportunities. So, opportunity, can we go to, why Africa? Why Africans? Why are we all here? Why aren't you in your office this fine Wednesday morning? Why are you in Africa? Why aren't you in the US? Why aren't you in Europe? Why are you building companies here? Why are you investing in companies here? I know we all have an idea because everybody here is involved in the African ecosystem in some way, but I'll do a refresher. You know, Africa has a rapidly expanding youth population. It's 1.1 billion now. In a few years, it's going to be 2.5 billion. A rising middle class, and it may not look like it, but the indices by which we measure the middle class in different continents are very different. So Africa might seem poor, but there's actually a rising middle class based on various performance indicators over the last few years. And we also have a young urban citizenry entering the workforce. Visit Dakar, visit Lagos, Lomé, Accra. You're going to see young people, very vibrant, you know, building things, doing stuff. They may not be building tech companies, but they're very smart young people who are ready to take on the world. growing connectivity. Everybody I have seen since I've come here, I admit I haven't been out much, but everybody has had a phone. Everybody has had a smartphone. The taxi guy had a smartphone. Everybody, is connected to the world's global economy. And so if you have 60% of the population here that's under the age of 35, and you have 45% of these people unemployed, it means you have the largest pool of untapped human capital in the world. Our greatest resource in Africa, in the coming decades is no longer going to be oil or gold or mineral resources. It's going to be all of us here. It's going to be people. So how do we harness this to build the future of the world? The entire world is going to now turn to Africa, and it's already happening, to source for talent, to source for brains. And we're already seeing this happening in leaps and bounds. I talk to my portfolio companies every other day, and they're telling me, oh, our best CTO has just been poached by a company in Amsterdam. Our marketing manager is now at Facebook. It's already happening in some way or form. Now, on the flip side, we are also finding young people building amazing companies and solving problems. According to Partech's 2020 report, had to find the French report because, we are in Francophone West Africa. 26 African countries received a total of $1.43 billion in VC funding. That's a lot of money. That's thousands of millions of dollars for context, And it seems like a lot of money, but it represents less than 0.5% of the estimated total of $300 billion in VC that was raised last year during a global pandemic. We had unprecedented amounts of VC raised last year, but Africa, with the billions of people here, we only got 0.5% of that slice. That's insane. We didn't get 5%, we didn't get 10, we got less than 1%. If we're saying Africa is the future, it's unconscionable that we're getting less than 0.5% of the funding. And so the question then becomes, it's not enough. And then another worrisome stat, of the 1.5 billion, over 40% came from firms headquartered outside Africa. That means that they are headquartered there, or they have to pay taxes to those countries. Or they're owned by foreign investors. And being owned by foreign investors is not even the major issue. The major issue is that when, the exit comes and everybody gets their check, where's the money going back to? Who are the LPs that, these capital allocators are going to have to return money to? Who is going to own our collective future at the end of the day? Am I going to have to say I've invested in 100 companies, I have $3 billion in exit, but at the end of the day, when we have an exit, I'm flying to Switzerland to submit a check. Why shouldn't I be going to Dangote's office? Why shouldn't I be flying to South Africa to say, oh, you're my LPs, I'm returning capital to you? Why am I not coming to Dakar, to the DARE office to say, you gave us $1 million in 2021, it's 2025 now, I'm returning 500 million to you. We have the capital. It's evidence. We're building businesses, we're building refineries, we're building banks. So why is this capital not being invested in people and innovation? When are we going to wake up to the fact that people are indeed Africa's greatest resource? And, the tides have shifted. Nobody wants to work in the bank anymore. Everybody wants to have responsibility for their future. Nobody wants to be a servant. When are we going to realize that the easiest way to create wealth today is by taking a chance on people and by investing in them? And the stats speak for themselves. If you have a company that has excellent traction, is in Series A, you're going to have all the investors chasing after those companies. But you have a young chap, straight out of university, has an interesting idea. Granted, it might not work out, but does he not deserve, or she not deserve, the chance to have some money to experiment and fail forward, like we like to say in Silicon Valley? Do they not deserve the chance to have, you know, $25,000, $50,000, or $100,000 to build out their ideas. Everybody likes to talk about he's built Andela, he's built Flutterwave. The backstory of that was he's built 2 companies that failed before then. And he got, you know, backing from investors in Canada to do it because they understood the risk in angel investing. They took a chance on him, and he was able to apply the things that he learned building out Bookneto and Fora when he was starting Andela to then make it become a global business. If we don't invest in early stage companies, we're not going to have unicorns to speak of in the coming future. Lower than 1% of investments made in Africa went to seed stage. Early stage innovators are greatly starved. You know, seed stage capital mobilization, there's a lot of noise about it, but in practice, it's shrinking as a proportion to the total size of venture capital, you know, and this is fueling market distortion. As it is today, when I get pitches, the large proportion of them are raising $2 million rounds, $3 million rounds, $15 million valuation, $20 million valuation. I'm a pre-seed and seed investor. It doesn't work for the fund mechanics. I need to find, you know, really early guys so that I can take a bet at them at the lowest prices possible and help them grow into that stage. And, you know, there's a lot of work going on to help these guys realize, but we can't do it alone. I don't want Future Africa to be the only seed investor. I don't want only Launch Africa to be the only seed investor. We need more investors at the seed stage to create the pool of, you know, growing and mature companies. So how do we create these billion-dollar companies in Africa? 1, you decrease the cost of innovation by building infrastructure. Internet here is a nightmare. You can't have video calls. The cost of data is prohibitive. It's crazy expensive. Wi-Fi is a luxury here still, you know, access to great Wi-Fi. We need to decrease the cost. A lot of people, they might have mobile phones, but they don't have access to computers, they don't have access to laptops. That's something that we need to fix as soon as possible. A story I really love is how Reliance Jio transformed India by giving people access to cheap internet. It unlocked a whole wave of innovation that is unprecedented. Who is going to do that for Africa? 2, unlock local capital. Unlock local capital sources for innovation. I'll focus more here in the coming slides, but I want to really focus on 3 as well. Create a stable policy environment for innovators and investors. I might need to do a blood pressure check soon because the Nigerian government is trying to kill me every day. I wake up and it's something new. He couldn't come here because, you know, he had to deal with regulators. These are the things that we're dealing with. We listened to a brilliant entrepreneur here say that she's found it difficult to close a round because nobody can agree on what investment terms mean. That's frankly unacceptable. We need to do the work of creating stable policy for innovators. So how do we unlock more capital? How do we create an African capital stack? And the real question here is, how do we fund the future if we say Africa is the future? What will it take? Now, there's a desire, as you know, like I said, the capital is available. There's actually the desire to fund innovation via venture capital, but legislation, as at today, prevents institutions from doing so effectively. And, you know, the truth is that you can't remove policy. You can't remove the role of the government from this, because once this part is unlocked, everything else becomes easier because nobody has an excuse anymore. I love to read about how the American Research and Development Corporation essentially created what is now known as venture capital today, and they were supported by the American government to do so. So we can't divorce, you know, policy from, you know, having more capital here. So in Nigeria, we're working on getting the Bofia Act signed into law, and this will allow banks to invest up to 10% of their assets in venture capital. As of today, it's illegal for banks to actually allocate capital to venture capital entrepreneurs. So what you have is that they're giving out loans, bad non-performing loans. And you know, you think if you can give somebody $100 million and write it off, if you give me $5 million, I can get you an insane return on that, you know, by taking a chance on early stage entrepreneurs. So we have to fund local and global fund managers to specifically invest in African companies. I don't want to hear that global funds have an Africa strategy. I want them to be here on the ground, doing the work. They have to have Africa firms. We've seen them do it in India. You have Sequoia India, we have Tiger India, you have Bessemer in India. They're down there on the ground. They're not, taking a call or trying to figure out what the market is like over Zoom, or coming here for 1 week and doing a tour of all the hubs. It's not going to work that way. So we have to actually actively fund and support global fund managers to invest in African companies. And while they're at it, they need to fund local capital allocators as well. We also need to amend the Investment Securities Act and the Pension Act to make it easier for venture capital companies to be formed and pension funds to allocate funding to them. As of today, it's virtually impossible to create a VC firm in my home country in Nigeria just because the asset class doesn't exist. You know what I mean? So work needs to be done. What structures do you need to create to enable that? How do LPs find it? What are the tax laws governing that? Then encourage local angel investors who fund companies at the earlier stages by giving them tax breaks and letting them claim tax losses on failed companies. This is why the US has such an active angel investing culture. They get tax breaks and they're able to claim tax losses. Last but not least, you have to expose people to opportunities that exist in startup investing. There's no way that you get build an African stack without giving you and you the opportunity to actually participate in this and create wealth. And that's the core of the work that we do. We make it so that you don't have to have hundreds of thousands to invest in companies, and with as little, I know it's not little, but relatively as little as $5,000, you can get a tiny piece of the next African unicorn. Venture capital as it is today clearly doesn't work for Africa in the clear-cut and dry way that it exists. We need to create new models for venture, and I look forward to seeing what we will birth through our collective work to ensure that we fund Africa's future. Thank you so much. I'll welcome questions now. Thank you.
Well done, Adenike. Really
Thank you.
well done. So if I understand correctly, you've, sorry if I'm disclosing numbers that maybe I shouldn't, but I understand that you've raised about $3 million or deployed.
We've deployed about $3 million.
Yet your initiative is really fantastic. It's the speed at which you are executing deals, sometimes very small tickets, $25,000. You've made over 50 deals, I understand, in a very short period of time. So it's kind of a VC 2.0 rolling fund applied to Africa. It's quite unique still. You guys are amongst the only one to do something like that. From this experience, maybe in jurisdiction where it would be a little easier to do that, how can we leverage on this experience to multiply, or how can we help Future Africa scale?
Absolutely.
To much bigger capital for deployment.
Absolutely. Number one, I need to be able to accept capital from LPs here in Nigeria without having them wire the money to the US. We tried Mauritius. KYC was going to be crazy. If you're asking LPs to give you their tax records from 10 years ago, they're not going to say yes. Nigeria is a no-no because we don't want to wake up tomorrow and not have a fund. And then that left us with almost no options than to have Angel List in the US be our back office and set up the fund structure. We've been in talks with some Nigerian asset management firms and fund management firms to say, can you help us aggregate the capital here and then act as a trust for Nigerian LPs who are here and be a part of our US fund. And they tell you all sorts of stories. They have to go to the SEC. So at the end of the day, it's not for lack of trying. It's mostly a policy level hindrance. we want to be here. We're working really hard to try to be here, to be headquartered here, to have our companies incorporate here, but the risks just outweigh the benefits. So if there's anything that I would say people are really interested in companies, but no, moving money around the continent is still very difficult. Being able to invest in jurisdictions is very difficult. So if we can change that, it would definitely improve the experience. And I know that that might not be in the direct control of anybody here, but if you have the ears of the regulators, and any country that does this is going to essentially unlock a whole wave and empower so many things. So that will be it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adenike. I think we're supposed to meet later.
Oh, awesome.
As much as I was looking forward to having E here, I think you should stay home more often because that was an awesome presentation.
Thank you.
I don't know if you're an economist or whatever, but that's the kind of messaging that we need. There's one point that I was hoping to hear more about, which is the community of co-investors.
Yes.
So I'm a big advocate of big tent investing, for lack of a better term. And I think there are trends in different parts of Africa where sometimes you have big groups of investors, so 10 investors for supporting a seed company.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have one or two. And so I think really just the idea of this kind of collaborative finance
yes.
Really can make a big difference in lowering the risk and also increasing the people that can help.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to hear.
Absolutely. I mean, the story of how we actually started community-based investing is very interesting. We were trying to raise a fund without much success because everybody was asking us for a track record that, you have to fund first-time managers for them to get a track record. It's a chicken and egg situation. But he had built companies, he had proven he could operate here, he had done angel investments and exited via secondaries, and they wanted still more proof, more validation. And so we thought, we have all these people, uncles as we like to call them, and aunties. And he said, he was telling me the story of how when he was starting Flutterwave, he had a couple of aunties and uncles give him $10,000 checks, $5,000 checks, and that was what they used to start. And I said, well, if you know all these people, why don't we use them to get money for more companies? I mean, their investment in Flutterwave is worth more than it was when they invested now. Can we replicate this model? And he was like, I'm not sure. But we tried because we had made a commitment to a company and we didn't have any money to give them. So we put out a call and we had 200 people registering interest. And we filtered that out. And in 36 hours, we had $138,000 to give to a company. And so far, it has meant when companies need FDA approval in the US, we have someone in the community they can call to help them with that. When we run into trouble with the government, some of the people that can represent us and take us through those doors are in the community. When companies need bank accounts, when they need Forex, because when they need, the biggest things the companies need now is debt because they need working capital. When they need that, there are people in the community. So it has definitely been very enlightening, not without its problems. There's, in your investment portfolio, you can't keep investing $5,000 or $10,000 every month as an angel. It's not sustainable. We need to find more people to bring into the pool. But in doing that, you also need to let people understand that this is a very risky investment. And a lot of Nigerians don't like to hear that they're going to lose all their money. So you have to be very transparent about that. That's another challenge. Getting in the money out of Africa for people. We have LPs all over the world, but the biggest challenge for the ones that are based here is being able to wire funds easily to the US so that we can disburse to the companies, timing for money to come in. Sometimes a deal is closing tomorrow and my money is not yet in. Like, there's commitments, but trying to pull all those funds together, and the lawyers are like, you have to sign, you have to wire, and I'm just like, You know, sometimes I wish we had a $20 million fund that I could just pull out money from every time. But this is rewarding in its own way. Definitely a very interesting model. And the goal, eventually, is to have like 100,000 people doing this. And hopefully, with as little as $10, people would be able to invest in early stage technology companies here in Africa soon. We have one more question. I can hear you, though.
Break and how this can basically help unleash capital. VC doesn't exist in the French-speaking area as well, right? It's not something which is unique to Nigeria. And this is also a word to the organizers, because I've attended a couple of events like this, I mean, dozens of them. And most of the time, we're always talking about regulators, but no regulator in this room. And if I understood one thing, building my company, it's the power of leverage. We spend a lot of time, energy, and money organizing things like this, but the guys that can make the decision are only going to spend 1% of the time doing this, and suddenly all the capital will be unleashed in Africa. I believe guys in my country are rich as well. They have money, they have the capital, but they will only invest in cement, in hotels like this, in agriculture, because there is no policy encouraging them doing so. The banks in my country have excess of cash, but they will not loan that money to startups. They will not give that money to VC. VC doesn't exist. So it's a word for the organizers. Next time, make sure we have regulators in the room so that they understand the power of innovation and they can take policies that can help you guys doing your job better. That's just my little contribution.
Absolutely. But to note, we actually had the minister with us 2 days ago, and we did give him some of this feedback. And, you know, he was very excited to work with companies as well. So I just thought to note that. And I think they're actually supporting this conference as well, the DER, right? That's what it's called? DER, yes. You're welcome. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Adenike. So, we are wondering how entrepreneurs in Africa should approach investors. And for that, we are receiving Zach for another keynote. Make some noise for Zach, please.
Check. I find stages like this a bit old school. We just changed slides. Okay, cool, awesome. Right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for making it out, and hope you had a good time last night and have had enough coffee this morning. I'm going to talk to you about how entrepreneurs should approach investors. That's sort of the theme of the talk, but there are lots of other aspects to it that I'll get over, sort of come to. About 16 years ago, I was sitting at the back bench of the GSB, the Graduate School of Business at Stanford University, and there was a professor called Randy Komisar, who's now a prominent Silicon Valley VC, and he said something that absolutely woke me up from my stupor, and it went like this. He talks about the concept of risk that we just spoke about earlier, and he said, the greatest risk in life is the risk of not doing what you really want, on the bet that you can buy yourself the freedom and the time to do it later. Right? The greatest risk of all is the risk of not doing what you want on the bet that you can buy yourself the time and freedom to do it later. Now, I was 21 years old, 22, getting my MBA, and I'm like, what? What the F am I doing with my life? I wanted to go work in corporate. I wanted to go be a banker, be a lawyer, and, you know, buy those 2 Volvos and 2.5 kids and 3 dogs and blah, blah, blah. And then that moment in my life transitioned into 16 years later. I'm sitting and standing in Dakar working with early stage founders. So the whole point about that sort of incident was a lot of us do things that we think we do, we like, but at the end of the day, we are always secretly somewhere on those Friday evenings when we have had way too many margaritas or tequilas, we're saying, oh gosh, I really want to do this, but I'm not there yet. So that's what entrepreneurship is about, right? I've spent the last 11 years of my life on this continent. I'm one of those unhelicopter VCs that doesn't live in Paris or London or New York, actually live on the continent. I meet entrepreneurs every day of my life. And I see that fire in the belly of entrepreneurs from Cairo all the way down to Cape Town and every major city in between. And that's what fuels the need for investing in innovation. And you won't get it right always. But persistence and building an ecosystem, actually our previous speaker at Anika's colleague E, who I know very well, said something the other day about the importance of building ecosystems, not empires. A lot of entrepreneurs want to build empires. And what do we know about empires? They collapse, right? The Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, they all collapse. So if you start out building an ecosystem and you use other people's time, resources, and you offer something for every major stakeholder, then you'll eventually win. The greatest tech companies in Africa, from the Flutterwaves to the Andelas, to the Yokos, to the Paystacks, to the Sendis, to the Twigas, they all build ecosystems. And if you have that abundance mindset from day one as an entrepreneur, you win, right? So speaking of ecosystems, could we flip to the next slide? I wanted to talk about some practical examples about how, as an entrepreneur, you need to understand how to build a market. So I spent 2 years of my life in Silicon Valley, drank the Kool-Aid there. There is a reason why Silicon Valley is the way it is today. Before you start building a venture, anywhere in the world, it could be Dakar, it could be Cape Town, it could be anywhere in the world, you got to understand, does your particular city or town provide you enough support for you to build and scale a true technology-enabled startup, not an SME? The continent of Africa is full of very successful SMEs, but very few are startups. SMEs have one goal, is to create sustainable, profitable wealth for the founder and his or her team. That's it. Startups, on the other hand, believe in exponential growth from day one. There are, I'd say safely, more than 99% of founders that call themselves startups are actually SMEs that are looking for working capital finance. So it's very important to understand that. So given that backdrop, what are some of the factors that are important in making a city like San Francisco or Tel Aviv or Berlin or Shanghai or Bangalore tech hubs? So one is, you got to understand the importance of developers, designers, digital media agencies, marketers that can fuel innovation, right? That's what San Francisco does exceptionally well. And you have these students coming out of universities like UCLA, Stanford, etc., that choose not to go and work in corporate or consult to academia, but they rather go and start companies, right? That's a very important thing that you have to understand when you're a founder, is, am I in the right ecosystem that creates that atmosphere for innovation? If I'm not, I can spend 3 or 4 years lobbying the government to change that, or I move into a different ecosystem. There are tons of Ghanaian founders that build businesses in Lagos. There are tons of Tanzanian founders that build businesses in Nairobi. So don't be hung up about trying to change everything. You'll be gray, 60 years old, and you would have achieved nothing. So understand how your ecosystem works from very early on. Number two, ecosystems that sustain innovation tend to have a good pool of risk capital, not just capital. If it was just money that mattered, right, the world's most incredible ecosystems for innovation would probably be Monaco, right, or some parts of South Korea, or, you know, just very wealthy places. I mean, the wealthiest region in the world on a per capita basis is actually an African town called Stellenbosch, which is about 40 kilometers north of Cape Town. It's got an incredible amount of wealth, and very few people live there. But the amount of innovation coming out of there is practically zero, right? Because the attitude to capital is different from the actual amount of capital, right? So always, as founders, understand what the investing landscape is before you even start building something. Number three is the importance of accelerators and incubators, and I can't stress how important that is. I mean, I come from an accelerator background. I'll talk about my background later towards the end. But you got to understand, how do you as a founder, as an entrepreneur, tap into networks from a human capital perspective and access to large corporates. Corporate startup collaboration is one of the most underrated and most important things in how you can scale and get the elusive traction that everyone talks about. So until about 7 years ago, large telcos, banks, retailers, insurers would completely disregard startups. In large parts of Africa, they still do. But luckily, in South Africa, in Nigeria, in Kenya, and Egypt, they're starting to work with them. And that's because it is very hard for you as a founder to scale your business outside of markets like New York, Silicon Valley, London, etc., and Bangalore and China without distribution. Distribution is one of the hardest things to get right. And if you don't get it right, good luck. The reality is B2C business models are not easy. They're not easy. They work when you have a very strong purchasing power from a consumer perspective, and you can tap into customers in an easy, effective way, right? The reality, I've lived in Africa for 11 years now. It is very hard, irrespective of what venture you build, to be able to access customers. So that thing here, B2B versus B2C and the cost of customer acquisition, super important. The good thing in Africa is the lifetime value of customers is very high once you acquire them. So from very early on, know how to reduce your cost of customer acquisition cost, and you have to be able to go and explain to an insurer, a bank, a telco, a retailer, how they can lower their customer acquisition cost by working with you. And that's why things like POCs, proof of concepts, pilots, license agreements, JV agreements, and things like white label solutions are super important. Where you build something for an insurer, a telco, or retailer, they own the client, you own the technology, and you license it. So you've got to have big picture thinking where you're saying, am I okay sacrificing margins for higher volume? And as entrepreneurs, we're always trained to think, what can I get today, this week, next month, next quarter? We never think big term. And the reality is, if you want to work with the big people in the industry, you have to think, how do I create value for you, and how do I make you look better? And then in turn, you create value for yourself. When you look at acquiring customers, so VCs will often ask you, what is your customer acquisition strategy? And I'm sure you've heard this before. There's a framework called the R framework, where you acquire, you retain. So you acquire, you activate, you retain, you refer, and then you create revenue. Often, founders spend so little time and money on understanding how to acquire customers. And they'll hire someone with a fancy degree in marketing to be the chief marketing officer. I actually think, I've been doing this for way too long now, the most important job in a tech startup is probably marketing and sales. Every job is a sales job. and you assume that marketing means, oh, I'm going to control my Facebook, Instagram, and social media accounts. No. Acquiring customers requires a certain type of skill. Activating customers, different skill step. How do I prevent customers from churning? How do I get every customer that signs up to my product or service to refer another 3 customers? How do I incentivize them to do so and not drop off? Good VCs, and there aren't many of them on this continent, will look at those metrics. They'll look at your cost of customer acquisition to your lifetime value. They'll look at your growth versus your churn. They'll look at your drop-off rates. They'll look at something called a viral coefficient on referrals. How do you incentivize your top customers to stay with you? Those sorts of things are exceptionally important, and startup founders pay too little attention to that, right? When it comes to what, I could speak about this for 2 hours, but I'm going to try and cut it short. What do I grew up in the early 80s and early 90s. Not sure how many of you grew up in that era as well. But back in the day, if you started a company, the 2 most important attributes of how you were valued was either you were the cheapest alternative in the market for an average product, or you had incredible quality and people were completely price insensitive. So you either had high quality or you were the lowest price or on the lower range. That's how businesses were valued, price and quality. And then you look at 2010 with the explosion of the sharing economy, the gig economy, big data, and the millennial and the Gen Z generation. If you look at the top 20 most valued companies in the world, from Amazon to Facebook to Google to the second tier, the Stripes, the Spotify's, etc. They get 2 things really right. They really, really understand their customers, and the reality is customers in the last 10 to 15 years are less sensitive to price and quality. What they really care about is convenience and time. If you can save people time, when's the last time anyone here watched a 30-minute video during working hours, Monday through Friday? That wasn't work-related. People don't have time, right? Take for example Amazon. Right? Amazon's worth close to $2 trillion. Did you guys know that more than 60% of adult Americans have Amazon Prime? You guys know what Amazon Prime is, right? Yeah. What is Amazon? So Amazon spent a ton of money for, over the last 10 years hiring the most smart data scientists and the smartest human anthropological psychologists. People don't talk about this. Amazon spends tons of money to literally go and understand how human beings in the US and all over the world think. It's borderline manipulation, right? I'm not a medical guy, but I know enough about it to know that dopamine, serotonin, and adrenaline are the 3 most powerful, what's the word? Yeah, hormones in your endocrine system. If you go and buy, let's say I go and buy, I don't know, I can't see anything here, but let's say a beautiful mug of coffee and I buy it on Amazon Prime. And if we had a few e-commerce companies here yesterday. If I buy something and Amazon Prime delivers it to me and I've paid $20 for it, a nice beautiful mug or a vase or something, what is the traditional mentality if I receive something and I don't like it and I want to return it? What are you going to say as an e-commerce company? We heard 6 e-commerce pitches yesterday. Oh, you're going to take pictures of it, put it back in packaging, write it in a claims form, submit it back, and we'll evaluate whether or not we can replace it. What does Amazon do? No, it's fine. Just tell us what you don't like about it, and we'll get you a new mug or a new cup or whatever within 24 hours, right? What Amazon does exceptionally well is they understand their customers so well that they tap into this need and this desire. It's the dopamine effect, right? Where people will keep buying because they understand that their client, in this case Amazon, knows them so well that they will keep feeding the beast. And in everything from Spotify to Netflix, I mean, these are all B2C companies, but they have B2B2C elements to it. Irrespective of whether your client is a consumer or a business, the startups today that do exceptionally well know how their customers think, feel, behave intrinsically well. And how many of you as entrepreneurs spend time understanding your customers versus building the most beautiful products? And that, my friends, is how VCs think. They want you to know as a founder how much your customers want what you do. No one's going to ask you for, there's a famous quote that says, no one asks you for a 6-inch hole. They ask you, so no one asks you for a 6-inch drill, they ask you for a 6-inch hole, right? So I don't care how you're going to solve my problem. What I do care is about, is my problem fixed? And that's what VCs want to hear from you as entrepreneurs. I want to quickly talk about some of the things VCs look for. So everyone's spoken about team. I'm not going to spend time talking about it. Your total addressable market, some high-level numbers. If you're not able to target a market of at least $100 million by year 5, it's very hard for a VC to take you seriously, right? From a traction standpoint, different startups in different industries have different ways of evaluating traction, right? So for example, if you're a digital bank anywhere in the world, your traction is almost entirely linked to your monthly active users, even if your revenue metrics aren't that great. If you're a payments processor, what's more important is your monthly transaction volume. If you're an e-commerce company, it's your GMV, your gross merchandise value. And it's very hard for founders that don't understand metrics in different industries to be competitive. But all else being equal, if you can, at a steady state, get to $50,000 to $100,000 in monthly recurring revenue, that's when you should be ready for a Series A round, right? I'll just skip past these slides. I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk briefly about unit economics, because this is stuff that most VCs will never talk about. Unfortunately, most VCs in the continent tend to be from the private equity ilk, and they work in corporate finance, they're ex-bankers, and don't understand how to build companies. The really good VCs on the continent come from a venture building, an accelerator background, or a former founders, to Ashwin's point yesterday. So when it comes to unit economics, what people really look for is, how does your lifetime value of a customer compare against the cost it takes to acquire them? And people often ask me, okay, cool, how do you, just 2 minutes, how do you measure the cost of customer acquisition? A good way to do it is just look at the total spend you have from a marketing, research, and distribution cost, and divide that by your active customers. And the lifetime value is essentially the inverse of your churn. So for every customer that drops off, the inverse of that is the lifetime value of your customer. That ratio, if it's not at least 3 to 1, ideally it should be close to 10 to 1, that's a sign that what you're doing is not sustainable, right? Most founders don't understand that, but VCs see hundreds of deals every year, and we look at these metrics. Of course, the crappy VCs will ask you things like, when do you break even, or what's your EBITDA in year 4? Don't talk to those people, please. Margins. Good VCs will tell you that margins are important, but not viewed in isolation. So if someone tells you, I have an EBITDA margin of negative 40%, that's okay. Amazon took 22 years to become a profitable company. Most people don't understand this. How is a company worth $2 trillion but doesn't make any money? Right? It's because your margins don't have to be negative, provided your top line, remember the whole time and convenience thing, provided you're creating value for your end users and your revenue goes up, you don't have to be profitable. However, the margins need to keep increasing over time. So what's really worth looking at is your EBITDA margins or your EBIT margins and how that changes over a period of time. So your margin together with your growth is a metric that good VCs look at. And then last but not least, it's how does if you're a very fast growing tech startup and you have incredible growth, but you have leakage through your churn, how does your growth versus your churn change over a period of time? And that's why when VCs ask you for your data rooms and they ask you these questions and you don't have a grip on this, it's a sign to us that you just don't know your metrics right. And it doesn't mean that you have to have a fancy 7, 8 tab financial model. No one cares about fucking financial models when you're a seed state startup. The only thing true about a financial model for a tech startup is that it is false. Sounds counterintuitive, right? If you go, do yourself a favor and go and look at, if you're a VC, look at the pitch decks of the 100 companies you've seen over the last 5 years and look at where they are today versus where they said their model said they would be. I can guarantee you less than 5% of them are even within a 10% bandwidth of it, most of them far below. But what we look at, 30 seconds, is how you think. So what is my market size? What percentage am I taking? But what are my margins? How much am I losing to churn? I will ask you for your financial model to see how your brain works. What shows up in cell G58, profitability in year 5, I know is wrong. But I will see. If you can't explain it to me like a 5-year-old on a piece of paper, I won't even look at you, right? So understanding these metrics, super important. Listen, I could speak for an hour about this, but I'm going to stop and take questions, otherwise my head's going to be chopped off by Katie. Okay. Cool. Awesome. Thanks everyone. Jeez. That chart here, super important chart. Everyone assumes here that just click one more slide. No? Everyone assumes that valuation is a function of how long you've been around as a startup or how much funding you've received. Please erase those from your head. Get surgery done. Do not. Valuation is purely a function of validation. If you can show me product market fit and a problem solution fit, the market will value you. I don't care if you've been around for 9 years in a garage or you've raised tons of money. There are companies that have validation that get, has anyone here heard of the $1 Million website in the 90s? No, come on. It was a startup, 30 seconds. It was a startup that was in 1999. I know I have no sense of time. That created a website that was literally 1,000 pixels by 1,000 pixels. And they said anyone in the world, from Joe's Plumbing to Walmart, could buy for $1 advertising space on the world's most incredible marketing website. And within 4 hours, they had 1 million people buy advertising there. That website, after about 4 or 5 hours, people were trading spaces. So the secondary value of that website went to the hundreds of millions of dollars. That company was literally around for 2 days, and they were worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Right? It's a legit story. But it's about validation, right? So it's not about how long you've been around. It's about product market fit. So I'm going to stop. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much for this presentation, Zach. So right now, Zach, you stay on stage, and we are going to receive the other panelists that I will call. So Tijan from Wuri Ventures, Lynn from Transcend Africa, Umar Bass from Yobante Express, and Grégoire from Orange Ventures. And I think Zach is going to be the moderator. So make some noise for them. And so the topic to this panel is how to create more investable tech companies in region and how to fund them. So it's in the continuation of what we've been talking about. So we are waiting for you panelists to join the stage.
Right. Good morning again, everyone. We have an incredible panel here this morning. I'm going to start before we get into sort of the topic of our panel. I'm going to ask each one of our panelists here to say a couple of lines on who they are, why they're here, what they do for a living, and your role in the ecosystem. So, ladies first. Go ahead.
Thank you, Zach. So I'm Lynn. As I've been speaking panels before in this conference, you know a few things about me. So I'm from Transcendence Africa. We're a second-time fund, and we're an impact with profit VC fund. So we started investing in Singapore and Central Europe in 2009. We've exited our companies to essentially to Rock Internet, but also we've done an IPO in 2013 on Australian Exchange. We're essentially on consumer products, retail, and digital retail, I would say that. Thank you.
Hi everyone, Greg from Orange Ventures. So probably know us a bit. We invest into Series A, Series B startup across the continent. And lastly, we launched a seed fund, and we invest into seed startup across countries where Orange is operating. So happy to see some of them here in the room.
Yeah, so my name is Tijan. I'd like to start with a tiny story. This is when I was an entrepreneur in Senegal in 2002. And at that time, so what's interesting is this, for me, is not the first entrepreneurial revolution in Africa. There have been a lot of them, especially starting with consumer goods. So the idea that Africans liked brands and valued brands and would buy them. We had a micro packaging startup to obviously the telecom revolution, and now we're in the building upon the telecom revolution. The story I'm going to tell, which makes more sense. So I remember one time, so we were a scrappy startup. We had about, I would say, 50 people at that time. At that time, I was focused on industry and like industrialization. And we went to a company which had, I want to say they probably had like a few $1 million that they had raised for their business. They had 15 trucks. They had a gorgeous factory. And we went there to buy their stuff because they were packing up and leaving. This was a milk company called Promasidora, just in case anyone wanted to know. The point is, I think entrepreneurial revolutions have happened and they will happen. The question is, who's going to capture the value? Is it going to be the multinationals that just swoop in? The companies based in the United States or in Europe or wherever the big economies, or are we going to capture it ourselves as entrepreneurs and as investors? So that's what I would say. My name is Tijan, and I run Worry Ventures.
Thank you, Zach. So hello, everyone. I'm Umar Bas. I'm the co-founder and the CEO of Yobante Express. Actually, I'm the little guy in here, and I'm a second-level startup founder. And with Yobante, we connect local careers with local commerce to solve the biggest problems in emerging markets. We definitely leverage on agent networks, using gig economy with independent casual carriers to deliver packages from point to point until the last mile delivery for e-commerce, retailers, businesses, and individuals. So I'm more likely, you know, the guy that, which is saying you could get a small rat which can slap an elephant. So it's literally an image. So we will discuss about it within this conversation. Thank you so much.
Awesome. I'm going to start off talking about just something I mentioned in the talk just before this, is the importance of how startup founders can work closely with large corporates. And we've seen a complete revolution in Nigeria, in South Africa, in Kenya, and to a certain extent Egypt, where you've had large telcos, banks, insurance companies, retailers start working with startups like Yobante right there, and it gives them huge access to channel customers. Francophone Africa, West Africa, there hasn't been a lot of corporate startup collaboration, and that's one of the reasons why startups may not have had the scale of their counterparts in Nigeria, for example. Is there enough being done? I'm going to start with you, Gregoire, because you probably have more experience in this space. How can corporate Africa in French West Africa work more with startups to incentivize them to grow and scale and benefit everyone, which is the end consumer at first? Just some thoughts around that.
It's a legitimate question. Thank you. The answer is tough because I think there is something which is changing now. It's the mindset of the corporates. In Francophone Africa, I think we see the corporates understanding that the innovation is coming from startups and not from their labs, and it's quite new. So we see corporates like Orange building open innovation programs to try to connect with startups. So there are a lot of initiatives just to try to connect and to understand the ecosystem. So there is the Orange Fab, the coding school, and we have Orange Ventures. But the main issue is how to go beyond the connection and to start to collaborate. And this is the main challenge. And I think what is at stake is the mindset of the middle management. Because you have people within the corporates who are happy to be in that big corporate, and they think, and they still think, some of them still think that innovation will come from the group, and they fear that if there is something from outside, they could lose their job, or they could lose the momentum and so on, and the structure overall is still quite resisting. And but what I saw those 2 last years is that now at every step of the management, people are just changing, and they understand that they have to collaborate, but they need a method, and that's what we are trying to do within Orange, is to explain to them how to talk to an entrepreneur, how to talk to a founder, and they're understanding now that we cannot take more than some weeks to take a decision with an entrepreneur. And it's one of the mission of Orange Fab, for instance, is one of the main value proposition of Orange Fab is to prove to an entrepreneur that we can take a decision in less than 3 months.
Yep.
That's still something challenging internally, but that was the main value proposition. And I think it's the right mindset that we have to promote within corporate, but there are not enough corporate trying to work with startups, to be honest.
Jan, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, no, I think Orange, quite frankly, is an outlier. They've been active on the continent for decades. The reality is that there's a large portion of global corporates who are sleeping on Africa, to be quite frank. So I had a conversation with PayPal. I was in San Francisco, and I spoke to their head of Asia. And I asked them, are you in Africa? And PayPal is one of the biggest fintechs in the United States. And they said, no, they're not in Africa yet. And I was like, how can you overlook a $4 trillion economy as a fintech? And 2 years after that, they made their first investment into a company called Tala, which is a fintech operating in East Africa. So the point is that these global corporates will come. And they can come in one of two ways. They can come and set up an office. So if you think about it, if you hear about Twitter opening an office in Ghana.
In Ghana, yeah.
That's a great step. The other way they can enter a market is by an acquisition, right? And that's what we as VCs like. So if you think about Paystack, that is Stripe coming into the market. They didn't set up an office. They just acquired an existing startup. And to Zach's point, by nurturing those relationships early, that's how the corporate relationships eventually become acquisitions. And that's basically the name of the game for some of this startup investing, is to reach a point where you can exit. And you don't necessarily have to, when you exit, to step down as a CEO. So the Paystack guys are still there as CEOs running their companies. But yeah, I think right now this is the biggest opportunity in Africa. Where I think if you look at, we talked about Amazon before. The biggest news that came out of the past week or so is, in my opinion, is the appointment of the new Federal Trade Commission chairperson in the United States named Lina Khan, who is an antitrust lawyer. And she wrote about Amazon. And Amazon is outcompeting the entire United States market. 46% of online sales go through Amazon. And if we don't recognize the power of digital in Africa, that same thing is going to happen. And what that really means is that in order for our economies to be competitive, they have to digitize. And they will digitize either from within, or they will digitize in partnership with tech startups like Yabante, like AfricArena, like many others. Sorry, that's all I'll say.
Quick comment from Omar before we move on.
So my point of view as a founder of Yabante Express is mainly we have few business clients. Few corporate business clients, right? Large corporate. How it happens? That was a simple process. They do a public binding. We submit as everyone. You have corporate that are submitting, and we provide what we got the best. So what we are providing, the values that we're adding, and it comes out that has been selected. So we did it with PMI. So that's how it works in Francophone Africa, but that's not how it should be working. So the thing is, compared to the other ecosystems, for instance, in South Africa or in Nigeria, or you have, the simple thing is, from one hand, you have corporates, which have, very likely large or unlimited resources and do not have, good innovation. That's reality, right? And from another hand, you have startups, which are totally the opposite, right? They don't have a lot of resources, but are so innovative. So, and putting these two worlds together will be, benefiting for everyone. What I'm saying is like taking advantage of those huge resources by running POCs, by running, that's proof of concepts, right? Pilots, and that's the job of incubators and accelerators. So for our experience, we did not made it in Senegal, but while we was at Startup Bootcamp, us being able to be directly in contact and benefiting from the Dentons, the largest law firm in the world, that was because, we was a part of an accelerator that made that happen. So that's the kind of things that we definitely need in our ecosystem here in French-speaking African countries. I'm seeing that a lot of efforts have been made by the DARE, and it's on the way, but definitely we need to move on to that to make sure that everyone is benefiting from it, because we're seeing as a result what's definitely that could do for the startups and as well for the corporates. And even if it's not directly, for the benefit of those corporates, but they have clients that could benefit from the innovation that the startups could put on the table. So that's my point.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And that actually dovetails into the next sort of section here, which is, a lot of investors, be them corporates or VCs or angel investors, look for clean structures to invest in. I'm going to get to you, Lynn, in a second. So things that founders often consider to be not relevant. So Tell me about your CRM systems, your IP protection. IP is a whole new section. Your legal, your audit, how you're set up, what your distribution agreements are with suppliers. That is where accelerators and incubators are super important, as you rightly mentioned. What is being done in Francophone Africa to educate not just the founders, but also investors about how to do this sort of corporate startup matchmaking process? But just talk to me a little bit about the importance of structure and yeah, just structure before even thinking about investments.
So I'm going to come back to a few things that you mentioned and you mentioned. Basically, okay, I'm going to start by you. I love your last chart. This is part of the courses that I give to my entrepreneurs. Why? Is because the way I see building a startup or anything in life is today you're here, in 3 years you're going to be here. In the middle, what sits in the middle are the skill sets and the building,
yep,
according to it. So I don't know if people like reading stuff here, but there is this book called Flow, very interesting, where he says the human brain is happy only when we upgrade the challenge just a little bit beyond ourselves, and we upgrade our skill set permanently to actually follow that upgrade, that challenge. So I like to work about that, and the way we've worked ourselves is also building startups, and very often from day one we're talking to the corporate, as you say. So we actually built the stepstones with the corporate, saying, okay, if you want that company in 3 years to look like that, we work with the entrepreneur who at some time gets a coaching out of the experience with us, who are more on the operation side, with the corporate who is more on the direction side. In 3 years, they literally have the term sheet on the table. And usually, frankly speaking, we've got very, very fast traction on revenues in that model.
Got it.
So what is really interesting is everyone gains from it, because as we're talking about that with Céline from Société Générale a bit earlier, sometimes startups are more adequate to actually build the sub-tools that the teams need, because they're faster, they're easier, their mentality is more made for the alpha beta test. They're more flexible, they're more agile, and they actually can, I call that the Lego system.
Yep.
They can put in the small parts of the Lego faster. So that's how I see myself building it here, at least, and that's what we're building, at least at the moment, with ITC.
Got it.
And we try to do that with LADER. You know, I like to build on skill set.
Yep. I mean, so things like, for example, the Jack Ma Foundation with the Netpreneur Prize, they would literally spend hours after hours educating. You'd be surprised how many founders and investors just aren't aware of standard operating procedures in this industry. So, you know, it's extremely important for, I mean, not just, I'd be keen to hear everyone's views, is in Francophone Africa, there needs to be knowledge transfer sessions where people are educated about, you know, the disclaimers you see. Venture capital is a risky asset class. You have all these sort of, you know, checks and crosses written down. People don't understand what venture investing is, what angel investing is, and what proper risk return trade-offs are. So within the Francophone African system, how can we get the different players to understand how important innovation funding is, without it being too, I mean, there's also a certain element of FOMO, a fear of missing out, right? So how can we spread that knowledge?
I think the situation now in Francophone Africa is changed a lot. I think the 2 last years, the deal flow I received 3 years ago is totally different from the deal flow I receive now.
Yeah.
And I think we have to acknowledge that most of entrepreneurs now in Francophone Africa are totally bilingual, and they learn a lot by themselves.
Yeah.
And Francophone Africa belong to the same world and benefit from the same content. So and we are, as a VC in Francophone Africa, I receive a call from Anglophone VCs I think at least once per week to look for a good deal flow in Francophone Africa. So for me, Francophone Africa is normal this area where Anglophone VCs were quite afraid of because they didn't understand the legal regulatory area. Time is changing, and I think that this year we'll see some nice Series A and probably more Series B, or at least in the next we'll say 18 months, but which will put Francophone Africa on the radar, and there is a huge opportunity here because I see a lot of entrepreneurs scaling from day one from Senegal to Côte d'Ivoire, for instance. And what Coin Afrique said yesterday is not easy, but probably easier to scale from one country to another here in that area is true. And there are not so many places in Africa that can say that the region is a real market.
Yeah,
that's the opportunity of this place.
And sort of dovetailing into that, I'd like to get to John's views on this, is how important, so two things, IP protection, holding company, opco structures, often not valued enough, but super important to investors, right, from a structure and protection perspective. And then I want to talk about exits. And there's nothing more comforting to an investor or funds knowing that there is a clear way in which you can create an exit opportunity. So let's talk about IP. How do you think, or how important is IP protection in Francophone Africa?
So I just want to add one little bit of context. Perhaps from my accent, you can see that I'm a dual heritage citizen. So I actually have a Senegalese passport and an American passport, reflecting my parents who met in France. You know, I actually registered my trademark with OAPI. OAPI is the West African Intellectual Property Association. And I think there is some role for IP. I guess depending on how mature the tech is that you're dealing with, if you're going to try to brand to protect some sort of information technology product, that's probably done. But going to the question about the structure, so the reason I brought up the fact that I've spent some time, my youth in the United States and my adulthood in Africa, is that the past 3 years I've been spending a lot of time in the Bay Area, and if you think about the importance of this notion of a business cluster. So if you're going to be a hedge fund, you'd probably better off be in New York. If you're going to be a fashion person, Italy is actually the place to be. And so there's some importance to having a linkage to where the capital of entrepreneurial investing and innovation, which is the Bay Area, Silicon Valley. And so the point is, if you want to enable global investors, a lot of times they're not comfortable with the structures of the OHADA. When we talk about Francophone really is referring to two regions. The UEMOA, which is the 8-country West African, and then the CEMAC, which is the Central African, which is 14 countries. But the cool thing about these regions is that there's one legal structure, it's called the OHADA, and it's harmonized across all of the countries. The problem is global investors don't know and appreciate how that law works, and so we've been encouraging startups to have a global holding company, meaning a company in Delaware or in London or in Paris, where the global investors understand and are comfortable with that. And so for me, the name of the game in entrepreneurship, in startups, is liquidity. You have to be able to attract a lot of interest from a broad segment of investors. And if you close that door by being headquartered in, let's say one country of the UEMOA, then you're not going to have as much liquidity. And so let's say tangibly, one of your angel investors who put in a $25K check and is expecting a secondary by the Series A, if that secondary is not going to come about because you're not able to accommodate a global investor, that you've kind of, from day one, it's not going to work. So until the legal systems in our part of the world are set up correctly to accommodate and work with startup companies, I think it's okay to have a headquarters elsewhere, just to be a holding company. And that's probably 95% of the startups have that structure. And if you don't, it's like you don't want global investors.
Yeah, and again, just to be clear here, the issue is not about you not being patriotic to your home country, because that's the argument that we always get. Oh, I'm from Senegal, I don't want to have my IP in the US. Sure, but then you're going to expose yourself to 5 funds versus cut your patriotism by a little bit. You're not cutting it. Be more realistic. I now have potentially 100 VC funds that could be interested in me. I create jobs locally in Senegal or wherever you are. I pay taxes here locally. I just have my investments going into a holding company in the US or in the UK or in Singapore. Lynn can talk about that in a second. But you don't get taxed on equity. You get taxed on profit, right? So it's simple concepts like this that, someone was sleeping in business school that didn't understand this. So that works really well, and it makes investments a lot easier. So there needs to be more education around it, right?
Absolutely, that's a question we have every day. I think it's the same for you.
Yeah.
But I think we need to just to remind that it's not, I think, necessary to do this at the first day of the company, because I see a lot of entrepreneurs spending some money on that issue while they should focus on traction.
Correct.
So
correct.
I think the right time is once you are raising quite a significant amount of money, because it's not difficult it's difficult, but do this when you have resources to fund that.
Correct. And also remember, it's not about you don't have to move your IP offshore immediately. What's important is to have your economic ownership by a US entity. So you can be, for example, Yobante Express is a Senegalese company. They have a holdco in the US. Even if the IP sits in Senegal, which is okay, by virtue of ownership, the economic interest is held by a US entity. So that's still okay. And then once you're, to Greg's point, once you've reached a certain number of revenue and can afford to hire lawyers to move your IP, then do that. But the ownership is the important aspect. Do you want to add a few points there, and then I want to get Lynn's views on the Singapore structure. Yeah. No, just I mean, how could potentially Singapore provide some sort of a conduit for this?
On the IP part, definitely Singapore has a whole strategy on that, and France as well. So in our fund, we have this very peculiar strategy. We work both with A-Star in Singapore and with IP managers in Paris. One of our advisors is an absolute IP specialist with Estilo. So we work on that, but I would say one thing that I always say to entrepreneurs: if you have something really specific that is exceptional, registering IPs might mean you're going to disclose what's in there. So I will say, okay, make business case, push out your marketing, get the traction,
exactly.
be the first,
Sure.
get your market share high, and then get on with it.
Absolutely. No, completely agree. And just sort of to sort of wind this off, because we're running out of time, is let's talk a little bit about exits, right? So most investors that have never invested in a startup tend to unfortunately think like regular investors. So I'm buying a property, I want to see rental income every month, I want to see dividends if it's a listed security. How do we, in French West Africa, change that mindset? And in my humble opinion, the best example is the best way forward is to show by example. We talk about the neighboring countries. We talk about the paystacks, the Flutterwaves, the M-Copas, the M-Pharmas, etc., and say that you have to change your mindset from short-term to long-term, and dividends are not everything. So any ideas in this panel, how can we get that mindset to change? Because once that mindset changes, it's the butterfly effect. It spreads, or a spider effect. How do we change that mindset?
As you said, I think the example is everything. You are mentioning investment which are not risky, and people want to see the value of the risk. And that's, I think, what is at stake today here in Francophone Africa. And, but like every ecosystem, they have their paths, and it's a sign of maturity to see exit, and that's what we saw in Nigeria, and Wave is an example here in Senegal. So it means that the ecosystem is maturing. Once you will have some business angel being very rich because they existed their company here in Francophone Africa, I think we'll have tons of BA because there are a lot of money here.
Yeah, and it's also important, I think, to mention this, is that contrary to popular belief, an IPO or a trade sale or an M&A is typically the only way in which you make money, typically. But just in the last 3 to 4 years, the amount of liquidity in the market through secondaries is astonishing. So on average, empirical evidence, you know, just the last 2 years, on average, at Series B and Series C, right, there's between 5 and 25% of rounds go towards secondaries. You will never see this number in a media article. So you'll hear Flutterwave raises $170 million Series C. What they will not say is that there was a huge amount that went to secondaries. But it doesn't go into the company, so it doesn't make headline news. But a lot of investors make money through secondaries. And that rewashing of capital is super important. It then starts money coming in from the funnel earlier. So
I just want to add one last point to this Francophone versus Anglophone debate. And I'll tell us a story about when I met Ezra and Shola from Paystack in 2016. And they were the first to ever go to Y Combinator. Really awesome. And what he explained to me is that they went on a process at Y Combinator where they had a speed dating with 50 different investors. And I don't think a lot of entrepreneurs appreciate how many doors you have to knock on in order to get a few yeses. And at the end of the day, Paystack had 40 different investors. And I think until the Francophone sector kind of is comfortable opening to the big tent style of investing, we're still going to be kind of beholden to one savior investor coming in and saving the day. And that's not the way it's been done around the world, really, quite frankly, successfully.
great. We've got a lot of questions from the audience. I'm going to ask folks here to raise your hands, and we've got 5 minutes. 5 minutes. I'm sure there are some questions, no?
Any question?
No questions. Right. Well, any parting thoughts from the panelists? I mean, the whole point of this panel is you know, how can we make Francophone Africa more investment ready? Any parting thoughts?
I actually have a question that
Sure.
I don't know why we didn't go there. I'm not seeing too many of the local African corporates coming as co-investors in what we do. Like, why is that? I mean, I'm asking a very stupid question, but because in Asia, there's so many of them.
I can give my thoughts on that. So if you're a bank or an insurance company, from a regulatory perspective, this is wearing my old Wall Street hat. I mean, tier 1 capital requirements make it very hard for you to invest into startups. So I'll give you an example. If you're a bank, I'll get to you in a second. If you're a bank and you want to invest $1 million into a tech startup, you have to legally show between $4 and $5 million in reserve on your balance sheet, and this is the important thing, that you cannot touch. You can't even put that in a bank account on an interest. So it's literally money in your mattress. So unless you're a corporate that acquires a 51% stake of a company, then it's classified as an equity affiliate, or I'm not sure what the exact term is. So corporates either want to acquire you fully or a majority acquisition, or they cannot. So it's very few corporates in Africa that actually have the ability to do small investments and have a 5% stake in companies or less. And that's the reason why you don't. Sorry, I want to just get a quick word in from Dimitri. You want to? Yeah.
And I do want to highlight that there are a few positive exceptions, but overall, it's really in need of change.
Yeah, you want to add something? Yeah. Greg?
Just to add, Francophone Africa is not. But I think in Africa we have 4 or 5 countries which are the top countries in terms of ecosystem, and then we have the rest of the continent, which could be Francophone or other region. Francophone Africa is just an opportunity, but all the other countries have the same issues, and I think they are the main 2 things that we need to build up those ecosystems are just seed funding and more incubators and more accelerators, and that's the 2 pieces that are improving now with. And I'm very impressed by what I saw, but I think what we mentioned about Francophone Africa is true for 40 countries.
Got it. Omar, you wanted to add a quick last thing?
So clearly the thing is with Francophone African countries, you do have, a very, small local investors, because mainly the active are not investing other way else, right? In other markets. Maybe it's because of the markets, it's because of the mindset, blah, blah, blah. There are a lot of reasons. But the thing is, from another hand, we have been seeing a surge of a lot of Asian investors, Japanese investors that are mainly investing, 100,000 tickets in Africa, even globally, but even in French-speaking. The thing is, because in Japan, they have really a very low risk, but the return over investment is, significantly slow. And from another hand, in Africa, of course, the risk is, bigger a little bit, but the return over investment because of the markets, because of the innovation, which, is an opportunity. But for founders or for investors to get access to those capital, they need to get better structure and, of course, to demonstrate execution, as has been said by Tijan, by Zach, and by everyone in this panel. So I think we should be focusing on how to make, champions on Francophone Africa. So we don't have, I will say, I don't know any champion in here. So sorry, guys, but that's the real truth.
Great. Thank you, everyone. We've run out of time, but thank you, all the panelists, for your contributions. I really appreciate it. Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you to all of our panelists. Another round of applause for them, please. So today we are not going to have like an official coffee break, but the coffee is still there. So if you want to help yourself, you can just go on the side very quietly, grab a coffee or something, and come back to sit. And we are just going to keep. We are going to keep going with the panels, with another panel about innovation in fintech. So the topic is going to be how other verticals can learn from the fintech success. And we are going to welcome Matthias from Julaya, Yuma Fall from Paydunia, and Jiba Jallo. And the moderator is going to be Ashwin. So I will ask the panelists to come intervene on innovation and fintech, how other verticals can learn from the fintech success.
I need to be on a flight, so panelists, please. Please, after you. How are you, man? Long time.
Yeah, long time. How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
How is Accra?
Accra is beautiful as always. Oh, man. I can be really honest over here and tell you that I'm really excited for this panel to happen because these are actually 3 people who are involved in the fintech space pretty deeply. We're going to try to keep this a little bit lighthearted, try to keep this a little bit open. We know there's a bank in here, we know there's 2 startups in here. I don't think anyone's professional context really matters. I think we would really like to, learn from each one of you and, your journey in this space as well. I think before we start, I would love if the panelists can introduce themselves and tell us one thing. What is the one most exciting thing you hear or you think about when you hear the word fintech? And let's start with, obviously, Yuma.
Okay, good morning, you all. I'm Yuma Fall. I'm the executive director at Paydunia, a fintech that we launched in 2015. And one thing that I really heard, really exciting when I'm hearing the word fintech is maybe inclusion and innovation. I think is maybe why we launched our startup, because we want to be sure that no one can be still excluded of financial services, and I think is why maybe fintech exists.
Okay, so you mentioned the word inclusion. All right, ma'am, over to you.
Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Jiba Jallo. I'm the senior fintech advisor for EcoBank. I'm very happy to be there. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course.
Thank you for the moderation. I'm a bit sad that people are not following because I think this is extremely important.
Yeah, I know.
How fintech is booming, the startup world in Africa is for me, is just impressive. And I think I'm going to say the same thing that...
yeah, can we use that?
It's definitely about financial inclusion.
Okay.
And when we see how M-Pesa, for example, have completely changed the landscape in Kenya and in East Africa, you can easily understand why fintech is important. So that will be on my personal hat. On my EcoBank hat, I think it would be neobanks, surprisingly, because we really believe that going to an open banking model is the way to go. And when we see all those neobanks that are really, having traction and are able to raise those very big amounts from VCs, it's very encouraging. So definitely financial inclusion, but also local startups that are booming in the continent and creating more jobs.
All right, okay. So we heard the words financial inclusion from you as well as entrepreneurship. All right. My man, over to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Matthias, co-founder of Julaya. We are providing a digital account for businesses to make payments to mobile wallets, so most likely informal workers and fast payments. And the word fintech, I think, is the most exciting is that today what we see is that fintech is still at a very early stage, especially in Africa, and is creating the backbone of all the ecosystems that can be built on it. So we had the first wave of revolution of mobile money, but now being disrupted in other spaces like digital lending, like digital insurance also, which is part of fintech. And I would say maybe what's most exciting would be the saying like fintech is eating the world, because I think that's what's happening on the continent when you see the amount of funding that goes into fintech and everything that's being played around with the banks taking into mind that things are going to change and they have to change their approach on the market and help the fintech thrive.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So I think we heard the word from you, progressive, right? In more or less words, which is more progressive. But also one of the other sectors which I think fintech is heavily influencing is KYC, right? Like the fact that most Africans are unidentified on a national level, unless and until you have access to a passport or you have access to a national card, actually using that to come in. So the other day I was actually with a bunch of investors, and we were actually had a very interesting conversation. So we were actually thinking about, a lot of people are starting to say that is fintech successful right now, right? And I would like to probably hear from, I think, 3 experts over here right now. Is fintech currently being measured in the way where we actually say it's successful, or do you think there are other ways to describe fintech? Because again, success is a very different, I think, word to actually be using for this sector, because we're always innovating, right? So one of the critical things is there a final stop for fintech? Are we now assuming that fintech is actually successful? Let me start this off first with, I think, our ma'am from the bank, because I want to make sure that we hear from you on a top level, and then we can come down to the startups.
Okay, so are they successful? Difficult to say. Are they leading the way? Definitely, yes. And I want to just mention maybe some metrics. First of all, I think it was the GSMA report from last year saying that almost 50% of the mobile money account in the world belongs to Africa. I think that alone speaks to itself. It's really the continent where technology and financial are impacting together. The other metrics that I want to give are in the startup world, in the startup ecosystem in Africa. In 2019, I think the overall amount that was raised by startup was $1.1 million, 2.2 in 2019, and then 1.4 in 2020 due to the COVID-19 crisis, of course. But the most important numbers was that in 2019, the amount raised by fintech represented 41% of the overall amount for all industries together. And last year it was 25%. I guess the year before, because of InterSwitch and the likes, it was very high, but those numbers speak to themselves. To me, this is really metrics that we can use to say that it's definitely the most successful industry within the startup award. And as much as mentioned, it's very important because it also helps create more solutions, enable more payment, more transactions, more exchanges, and to me, it's very exciting.
Yeah, Yuma, let's hear your perspective.
Okay, from my perspective, I think we still have a lot to do. I think there is a lot of potential, and actually the market for me is not enough mature for what we can just reach. Maybe I have too much expectation, and maybe I don't see it like a bank, but from my perspective, what I see is if we are just make comparison 5 years ago, 2 years ago, we see that there is increasing of the numbers of people who are using mobile money services, who are included on the financial services. But for example, if I see our area, we had a lot of challenges that we need to go. Because, for example, if you see people, they want to do more than payment. We maybe don't have enough financial services like lending, credit, or there's a lot of things to do. Of course, there is a lot of people who are investing in tech because the whole market in Francophone area, we are not raising a lot. Yeah. Is the things. And for example, fintech and what I understand also, e-logistic is the driver on the all funding that we are doing. Is maybe we see this amount, but the thing is the market's still really young. We still have a lot of things to do. There's a lot of needs, a lot of gap on the market, and we need to work more to be sure that we will reach what we can do. Because what I see the other country, when I'm traveling out of Africa and going there, I can make payment contactless, seamless payment. The user experience is just amazing. We are just so far. I think we are just so far what we can do.
Yeah. I think we're leapfrogging, which is what I think a lot of investors, especially Leapfrog Investment, actually says around customer centricity, etc., where they are completely operating in the insurance space, and Leapfrog Investments currently is, I think, one of the biggest investors in insurance on the continent. And they are saying that trends in Africa by 2030 is that it's going to most probably leapfrog the developed world, because that is how innovation is running on the continent right now. But you, Mr. Matthias.
Yes, so I would say maybe the word success would apply first at fintechs that are corporate fintechs, especially mobile money solutions. So the champions on the continent, they are like Orange Money Solution, MTN's Money, because they invested, it's just a 10-year-old industry, and they are processing billions of dollars of transaction, making hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. And they invested a lot of money that if you take from a VC perspective, for example, just Orange Money in Senegal or in Côte d'Ivoire invested $7 million of investment worth to be where they are today. So in terms of perspective, if you take into account what they have done, it's amazing how they created this ecosystem, and a lot of fintech are actually built on this ecosystem, like Petunia or Julia or all these kind of startups. And regarding maybe what Zach said about the metrics and what you want to see as a metric in success for fintech, what's really unsettling about fintechs is that you cannot look at them on the same perspective as an e-commerce, or because you would not look at the valuation from a revenue perspective. And this applies everywhere in the world. If you take I don't know, maybe let's take Stripe, but their valuation is a multiple of their, total volume of transaction processed, and not, for a long time, it was not their revenue that was a metric of their valuation, because it takes a lot of time. And this is something that investors, it's already difficult for, investors to understand the VC model, but the VC model in fintech is even stranger, let's say. And just maybe to take one of the most successful African fintech, but Paystack, sorry. Maybe they will rebrand as Paystrap someday, but...
Well, you say the truth anyway.
Yeah. So Paystack, one of the country launcher for West Africa. So they are launching in Côte d'Ivoire actually right now. And he told me that the thing they created, an ecosystem so powerful that the clients or the customers that bring the revenue of Paystack today are customers that were non-existent before Paystack. So they created a whole ecosystem, and the success they measure is that their biggest customer today are not already large companies, but are companies that are created out of the blue thanks to Paystack.
Yep. And I totally agree with that. At Mest, we consider fintech to be the basis of all integrations. We think it is, it is the most influencing vertical, which can influence other verticals as well. That being said, this is now a good point for us to actually transition into the panel topic, which is more about what you see are the influences of fintech on other verticals. I'll give you a very big example. I recently had dinner with a really good friend of mine from Ghana in Senegal, who's actually using a fintech solution to sell solar products, right? This is PG Ghana. They've raised millions and millions of dollars. But when I asked him very simply, are you selling solar or are you selling finance? He refused to answer me because he was like, it's a classic chicken and egg issue, Ashwin, right? So in your cases, and again, each one of you operate in such discrete, discrete verticals as well. What do you think are the top verticals which fintech can influence instantly? I'm not talking 20 years from now. I think fintech will influence a lot of them. But I'm talking, if there's a fintech entrepreneur in the room, which are the different verticals you see where they can go in actually using fintech as a conduit or as a connection agent? And this time, let's start with Mr. Matthias, actually.
Yeah, so maybe go back to the first thing I said about fintech is eating the world, because I believe in what we see in some specific industries like logistics or even distribution of solar or energy solutions, is that the main factor of growth becomes the financing part. So if you take maybe one example would be Phoenix, that was bought by a French company, Engie. Today, they make their forecast on a 3 years pass and saying, okay, we're going to be reimbursed for 3 years, so we need the financing to, distribute the product. And it's how you get the cheapest financing to deploy your solution. So especially in distribution, like solar panels, it's really relevant. And also, we sit in the logistics space. For example, Sandy, maybe you know this logistic company in Kenya. And for example, now they are also launching Côte d'Ivoire. So I'll talk about Côte d'Ivoire because I'm based in Côte d'Ivoire. And they are launching a financing product because it helps them grow much, much faster, because the first part of their business was just, making the marketplace for demand and supply of drivers, had the bigger issue, which was the financing issue. So you see a lot of convergence and a lot of new business model building just on the financing part. Maybe last example will be one of the founders of Capel Africa Ventures. He has a company called Crediation, and they make financing for this type of companies, like for all the working capital financing. Yeah. So I would say fintech solutions that bring into the lending space are really interesting for all of the startups.
So you mentioned energy, trade, and transport.
Yes,
right?
but it can apply to like
anything, any of those.
Agricultural goods. Yeah. You have a lot of working capital in the like I would take the cocoa sector in Côte d'Ivoire, for example. But all the sectors that require working capital, I think, is the next big financing need that need to be disrupted. Because it's kind of the gap between just payments and what fintechs do today, and then long-term lending, like investment lending, which is even riskier and totally out of reach of a lot of startups today.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's a very interesting point. Why don't we go over to Yuma first, and then we can come for a macro level to Jiva ma'am.
Okay. From my perspective, I totally agree with Matthias, but I want to add that if I see there is what we are calling internally our natural partner, is all people who are just providing services. For example, because there is now fintech in Africa, someone like Amazon or Netflix, they can now provide services of African population. And I think this is the things that fintech can change right now, because without payments, they don't exist, because they don't have contact with the end user. They don't have contact with the population. There's a lot of things that we can do, because we are businesses, we want to make money. But I think the first vertical that we can influence, impact, is maybe the services for me. And after you can see, of course, like explain it, e-logistic, e-commerce, but I will also add insurance. But this is just the side of businesses that we can work with them and they can help. Because when I see insurance is something also that I can maybe include on e-services, but for me, it's more like another management of cash for someone else. And for insurance, yes, we can just impact them really quickly. Actually, we have some businesses that are insurance, and we see like the difference for them. Because of the coronavirus, they need to think cashless, and for that, I see that they need change, and fintech can help them to have this new digitalization. This is maybe the kind of verticals that fintech can help, and there is also fintech-like partners, and then I will look more for banks, because all the time we are coming and challenging them and asking new things that they maybe don't think about it, because bank is really, they are not really flexible. Is because of the regularity. We clearly understand why. But the thing is, when you come and ask and explain new kind of needs, they also push them to have this kind of innovation. And I think we are also impacting bank, because we saw bank 5 years ago, 3 years ago, and bank now, and the change that they have.
I agree with that. And that is a very good segue for you, ma'am. She has set the floor up for you.
Yes, definitely. That was actually my first point, and I'm glad that she mentioned that. Definitely, the first industry is definitely banks. I mean, financial for me. And for all the examples, the industries that I will talk about, I want to give very concrete examples. And I always want to stick to the bottom of the pyramids because that's really where we need to bring some changes and have impact. And a few years ago, I was discussing with a bank in Kenya, and they were explaining how technology and fintech help them improve credit scoring for their customers, and how a woman in a village in Kenya can now wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning, lend money, $10 for example, go to the market, buy the vegetables, come back, sell it, and then got some revenue at the end of the day. And to me, it was really impressive. I definitely agree. Banks are definitely the first corporates that are kind of changing their mindset because of fintech. And just to mention, there's a question that came during Zach's panel on why corporates are not financing. On the bank perspective, I'm quite new to the bank, but at least the first thing that I understood is that startups and fintech look strange to banks because they just don't know it. So they are not VCs, they don't know how to invest in these kind of companies, but things are changing, hopefully. So I hope that we will see more and more good trends. So that's the first industry. The second one, to me, is insurance, as she mentioned, again, for the bottom of the pyramids. When I think about companies such as Jamii in Tanzania or Pula in Kenya that are now enabling all those people who had no idea how insurance, they were not even thinking about it, not being able to have insurance and be covered on a health standpoint, that was really, really a very positive point that I saw. And the third one is e-commerce. We all know that merchants, let's say informal industry, represent 80% of the financial transactions in Africa. So being able to give the possibility to all those merchants to have an online presence and also benefit from technology to get paid directly digitally, it's also a very good thing for all these people that are struggling, getting the right level of just making it to the right level of financial position to be able to improve the way they live. So I think that fintech actually applies to all industries. It's very difficult to say that they have more impact in this or this. Agri-tech also is very impacted, but for me, those three are the ones that I see with big trends, yes, and impact.
And for me, one of the biggest things which I think fintech is actually going to influence, which I think is a big challenge on the continent, is health. I think it is going to bring about such a convergence of the person and basically service providers, and fintech is going to be that connection. And again, we're seeing different agencies come out, Ilara, Maisha Meds, and Pharma, all these companies, and they all operate fundamentally, again, on a financial product, which then they go out to actually sell to pharmacies, etc. And regarding the banks, and again, I'll be very honest, as an investor in these markets, I come from India. And in India, for example, currently a simple recharge application for putting airtime back in 2009 is one of India's biggest neobanks right now. It's called Paytm. They were basically running the entire monetization. And I can be really honest, that took 10 years. When I first came to the continent in 2014, I have seen banks here evolve 4 times, 5 times as fast as Indian banks have. And currently there is a startup in India which is currently talking about acquiring a bank. So you can, there's a company called Bharat Pay. They're just raising money from a French private equity company called Centurion. They're putting $300 million to buy a bank. The story is, when will that happen here? Hopefully it's not EcoBank. We still need EcoBank around, but the smaller ones, definitely. But I think knowing that there's time, I've already been instructed with a piece of paper. I want to just touch on one piece, which I think a lot of people here don't understand, which is regulations. I think, again, regulations is its own mix. It's often uncontrollable by even banks, by even startups. And again, I think we're all facing the same side, and we're all sitting on the same side when it comes to regulations, right? I would really want to talk to you guys about a little bit of that. Maybe you guys can tell us in your own ecosystems, one positive and one thing which is a challenge with the regulations as well. So let's start off with Yuma, and then we can come across, and then we can hopefully wrap this beautiful panel up.
Okay, then I will try to go quick. I think one positive things for the regulation part is maybe actually there is no agreement for fintech on our side, on our area. But the thing is, we are going to central bank. We are explaining what we are doing, and they let us continue to innovate. I think this is some pretty good because they can say, no, this is not regulation. This is not safe for us. We are here to be sure that the money can be safe. You can just start to work like that because we can control you. We can make audit on your platform. And I think it's a real positive things. And about challenges is the things we need agreement, of course. But I think the biggest challenge will be we will need agreement more like B2S, I think, is Europe. When you see like there is kind of agreement for small enterprise to be sure that if you are a startup, you can have agreement for 10K than not have agreement for like mobile money and you will pay 1 billion off. They need kind of agreement that include the whole ecosystem and not just an agreement for the big competitors, big operators, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm working for a bank, so I'll try to keep the regulator on my side. I don't want to be here, okay, just for today. So no, actually, I want to speak about the positive things. We all know that there are challenges.
Of course.
It's a fact. But at least we see trends. So I recall, I think it was 2 years ago, the Capital Market Authority in Kenya, for example, opened a sandbox. That was the first one.
Yep.
And it was like, okay, now regulator understand that we all need to go to openness, and it's very good. We see Ghana, same for Ghana, very recently. Nigeria, yes, we have the issue with blockchain, unfortunately, but at least they've been able to allow, for example, QR. They have a standardization on QR for fintechs to enable payment. That's good. I hear about a project with the Central Bank of UEMOA, also working on Sandbox. Definitely good trends. There's a lot of things that needs to happen. During the COVID-19 crisis, when it was very hot, they kind of moved the caps that they put on many mobile money transactions, and it was very positive for everyone. So I want to keep that positive trend happening. Even ourselves, we're having discussions with and when I say regulator, I'm talking about the central banks, but even on my side, within the bank, the internal regulator, we still need to do some work, to explain that it's not just about risk. There's also opportunities, and we need to foster innovation, and let's do it together because you are the one who can help us mitigate the risk.
Yeah,
yes,
of course. Yeah.
I think you already told everything I wanted to say, but maybe to make a comparison, but in Europe, you had the what they call DSP1 regulation that was put in place in, I think, 2012 or 2010. And then you had some countries putting in place regulatory sandbox, especially the UK and Denmark. And the biggest fintech in Europe are coming for those countries. So you see the impact, like Adyen from Denmark and TransferWise, all these startups from the UK. So you see the impact of this. And as Yuma said, here in what we call the YMU zone, you have no regulation for fintech payment services. So you just can do it without any overview from the central bank. They will invite you to some panel. They will maybe ask from time to time some reference for your banks, etc. But they don't have a very proactive approach for now. Maybe it will be like changing in the next few months. But what I want to say is it's good for to launch your fintech startups, but then you got the trust issue with your customers. And when you want to have the traction with the big corporate, they will ask you, but what kind of agreement do you have? And I think here the gap is being filled by the banks. So the banks are starting to change and starting to make partnership with fintechs. Especially you see in the market EcoBank with their APIs so you have a very interesting APIs you can use with EcoBank. I think it's one of the first bank. And it's not because EcoBank is here, but and you see then the other banks, starting to take some of the risk and saying we cannot reach those type of customers, so we just take the regulatory part and we're just going to oversee what the fintechs do. because they are not able to get an agreement or license from the central bank. But other markets are more advanced, like even Ghana, but Nigeria, Kenya, or some North African markets like Morocco, where they have those types of license, like PSP license, which are quite fitted to what some fintechs do in the payment space.
Yeah. Yeah, so I was just about to like say, and you mentioned, both of you mentioned Ghana. So last year during COVID, the Bank of Ghana commissioner actually called all investors and all fintechs in the market. And he said one sentence, which actually resonated with me a lot. He was like, there's no one else who's responsible for the citizens' money as much as I am. And that then struck a chord with me, because they're basically trying to protect the people. Again, most of us are trying innovations, and innovations often have both positive effects as well as very negative effects. But at the end of the day, a fintech can always leave the ecosystem. But the Bank of Ghana, the Central Bank of Nigeria, the Kenya Credit Bureau, none of these people can leave. They have to stay there and do their jobs. And because of that, when he launched the fintech office, they got 700 applications in the first 3 days. Like when he said that to us, everyone in the room just got up. We were like, we understand you, sir. We're going to all send you applications. And now the fintech office in Ghana provides you exceptions. They provide you access to Sandbox. And again, these guys, the fintech office is run by someone who is very corporate, but yet very startup-y. He comes from CGAP, World Bank. So again, very, very innovative. And I think everyone's doing their own unique way of actually passing the bureaucracy, as we say. Right? I think it was a great panel. I think we all had such great insights. And as people who we operate on fintech, I would like, for us to give, one tip to the people out there to actually see what we get. If they want to innovate in fintech, what would you ask them, or what is the piece of advice you would give? Why don't we start with Yuma?
Okay. It's a hard question, but I can just share what we are doing. The customer needs. Like if you want to innovate or something like that, you just need to list on the market. Yeah. Yes.
It's even harder for me, and the reason why is because I never founded any company. So I always say that I'm not necessarily the best advisor. Maybe the only thing that I can say is that when I started in the startup ecosystem in Africa, my assumption was that as long as you have customer, you're good to go, which is not the case. At some point, you need funds. Yeah. You need accelerators, you need all those things. So I realized that it was very important, and I've been working with the likes of Flutterwave, Paystack, and all those guys, and I see the impact now. So just leverage all the tools and platforms that you have to make sure that you have the support that you need to move forward. Yeah.
Maybe from what has been said, network with other fintech founders, because the problems are similar in all the markets, even in other emerging markets. So if you talk with them, engage with them, and you will learn much more on what's working, what's not working. Just one example, but I heard from some people in Kenya that consumer credit or nano loans are not as good as the projections were meant to be, and when you hear that, you say, okay, maybe not replicate the same mistakes in other less developed markets, because it doesn't work that well.
Yeah, of course. All right, we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. Does anyone have any questions from the audience? We have a young gentleman there who's already raised his hand.
Hello, everyone. Well, I'm not so young.
Age is but a number.
Thank you for that. My name is Adamou Moussa Saleh. I'm the MD, the Director General of ASMT, which is an engineering school here in Senegal. Congratulations to all of you. My first contribution is I will focus it on the end user perspective. As a user of their product, I think if there is a challenge which needs to be taken up, is the digital trust. Even me in town, I won't talk about my parents, maybe in a village, before to use my credit card to purchase some product. I think 2 times before to use it, because I will not know what will be the security about my credit card. I think the first thing we need to do is to think about the digital trust. Go to see people, to convince them, to tell them that their data are secure where they are purchasing product using your platform. The second thing, as a an end user, I think that there are a huge number of platforms. There is an effort to be done because I think interoperability between the product, between the platform are very important for us. So this is my contribution. Thank you for.
Thank you, sir. Last question before we wrap up. Yes.
Good morning. My name is Jean-Claude. I'm co-founder and CEO at Moja Ride. My question goes to the lady from EcoBank. We had a chance to work with EcoBank during the FinTech Fellowship, and we found EcoBank to be extremely slow in working with startups. So what's being done, since last year till now, for EcoBank to help us move a little faster? And even worse, EcoBank in English-speaking countries tend to move faster than EcoBank in the French-speaking countries.
That's
so if you can give us some hint on what exactly we need to do so we can move at the speed that works for our customers. Thank you.
Excuse me, can I get a mic? I think one has a very low voice.
So I will start with the first question on security and trust. I guess that's the reason why we have regulators and central banks, right? And the reason why is because they need to ensure security of the users, and they are very, very helpful for that. There's a lot of processes that you need to go through, either if you are a bank or a fintech, to make sure that at the end of the day, all customers feel secure when they do transaction with your platform. So I think that is done. On my perspective, I would say that that's one of the reasons why I think fintechs needs bank, is because we already did that work on making sure that we comply on all the requests or the requirement that central banks have. I know it's still very difficult. I recall that, so as Jean-Claude mentioned, many times when you go for the internal regulation to ask for a partnership, it's very difficult. And one way that we found is to ask for letter of non-objection for the central bank, just at least to say, okay, we as a bank, as EcoBank, we ensure that we will make sure that the fintech will comply with all the requirements. So please just give them approval so that we can move forward. So that's one. On the interoperability, actually the fact that there's a lot of platforms, I guess the reason why is because everybody see the opportunity. So everybody wants to take his or her part of the cake, of course. It's a fact. I mean, in every market where you see an industry that is very profitable, everyone wants to be part of it. So, but I think there's a lot of innovative things. I don't want to mention specific names, but a lot of fintechs and a lot of initiatives that are ongoing to make sure that at the end of the day, the customer is the winner, right? So to Jean-Claude's question, definitely. I think it's not just talk about the difference between Francophone and the Anglophone. Let me give you an example. Even before I joined EcoBank, I was working with the ecosystem, the startup ecosystem in Cameroon, actually in all Africa. And in Cameroon, I realized that things were going way faster in the Anglophone part than in the Francophone part, and it was the same country. So I don't know why. I can't explain that. It's a fact that we are living. So what are we doing? We are currently working with a company that is helping us accelerating a partnership between corporates. They are actually expert on that. How the kind of changes that we can add internally to make sure that the partnership between corporates and startup in general are going faster. So we are working with them on that. We're trying to push as much as we can, but when the risk people or the legal people say no, even my CEO can say anything, unfortunately. But I mean, the fact that I'm here, I think it's just showing that we want to get there, and we are making everything possible for that.
And I think it's like comparing apples and oranges. I think they're two very different places. All right, I have been instructed as a helicopter to stop this panel. I would like the audience to give actually a huge round of applause to, I think, the panelists. I think they were very honest with their experiences. I think they were very critical with their experiences. And thank you so much for joining me, guys. Thank you.
Thank you to our panelists. So, African fintechs should think big, ladies and gentlemen. We should think big, mostly for African fintechs, and think also our way. And that's why we are going to ask ourselves and discuss with Biram Sok, that I will call on stage, to know is there or what is the African model of thinking big, and how the African fintech success stories can help drive investment and acquisitions in Africa. So a very interesting topic that will be presented, a keynote by Biram Sok from Founder 5. Can you please sit down and focus? It's a really, really interesting keynote that is going to be presented by Biram Sok. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like you to make some noise for Biram Sok, Founder 5.
Thank you. Gosh, so I just need to figure out how to change the slides. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Really excited to be here. Thank you for that introduction. As an entrepreneur who tends to just try to, I would say, adjust with the way things go and where our minds take us, this presentation started with the whole topic around fintech, but has evolved into other topics that I thought were quite interesting to be able to bring up here and be able to start a conversation around a number of things. So please bear with me as I go through this presentation. It's more of a discussion, and hopefully there'll be lots of time for questions and a conversation. So maybe we can move to the next slide. So I'll just start with a quick introduction about myself. So I was born in Senegal. I was raised around Africa, Kenya, Congo, Niger. I was taught in America, where I went for college and started my whole career for about 26 years. And I am now living in Senegal it's been about 2 years, where I'm back to being an entrepreneur as well as providing coaching services to different entrepreneurs a little bit around Africa as well as the US. So this is a bit of me, and I'm also a mother of a 9-year-old who's here and watching, as she's an entrepreneur herself, and so learning from all these different talks that we're having today. So some of the inventions I witnessed as I was growing up. I first started with the year I was born, and then I decided that would give up way too much information about my age. So I gave it a bit more of a range so you could see a little bit of, so you could just try to guess. It's somewhere within all of these dates. So it first started in 1973 with the mobile phone. We got the barcode. Then we had the supercomputer, personal computer. Obviously, there were lots of other inventions that came up in between, but these were just some that spoke to me. GPS in 1978. 1982, the computer virus was introduced. 1988, the MP3. 89, the World Wide Web. I was quite surprised, actually. I always felt like it was way before that. and 1999 Bluetooth. So this is just to give you a sense of everything that happened when it came to the digital world and all the new things that were introduced. So obviously, I personally was always attracted to technology. I actually used to get in trouble as a child because I was the one that would open up the VHS tapes. And my father would come and just scream at me for having to open it up. The biggest thing that really always confused me was the VCR. I always wanted to know what is happening inside this box that makes it that this image is then showing on this screen. It was just fascinating for me. So I was always very curious, always interested in learning more and being challenged. And so, as my career, I started as a developer. I developed even in COBOL, so that will tell you a little bit of my age as well. Did some Visual Basic, did some C++, did some Java, so really went all around the world when it comes to programming. But I was really lucky to have the opportunity to move to San Francisco. But before I even talk about that, there's something that's not here that I'll go through very quickly as we talk about fintech. My very first idea was to be able to build a platform where people could pay their bills online. This was, and transfer money to each other. This was before Western Union let you do it via apps and everything else. This was before PayPal, before any of them. I used to live in Miami, where the ecosystem was not necessarily entrepreneurial in the digital sense. And I got scared. The day I got an investor who said, I will put money into your company to build this, I got scared and dropped out of that whole idea. I said, I'm not done for this, I'm not ready for this, I will not do it. As I moved to San Francisco and lived in a building where there were a number of entrepreneurs around me, some of them had succeeded and made quite a bit of money, that gave me the confidence to become an entrepreneur. And so my very first startup was called Music Phone. We built an application that allowed consumers to send songs to each other for their birthdays, to tell them they love them and everything else. From that, I had deals with different record labels and then went into launching a music recognition application. This application is what led to becoming what we know today as Shazam as the consumer service. Before that, it was called Music ID. It was Pound ID, which is what you would need to dial because there was no smartphone at the time. And Shazam was a UK-based company that was just about to shut down, and basically we got the exclusive rights to use their fingerprinting technology and build the consumer application around it. I used to run the service from my home, just don't tell AT&T. And so, then I actually moved. I was also very fortunate to be associated with American Idol and be involved, as I was on the board of the company that had acquired it. We were able to introduce interactive content, meaning connecting a TV show to an online interface. AmericanIdol.com became the #1 website in the world, the most visited website in the world. At the time, there was not one TV station that had first the content that dealt with voting, which had been introduced, but a number of other things. So I'll just move on to just say I've done lots of things. I moved on to digital receipts, another company I ended up selling, did some ad tech. And then now I'm based in Senegal and doing some B2B e-commerce. The question you're going to ask is, what's the connection between all of these things? You seem like a very confused person. And so it took me some time to sit down and think and say, what does it really mean to be an entrepreneur? What is it really that's motivating me? And I realized that what my biggest motivation has been to be first to introduce. I always wanted to be the first to introduce music recognition, the first to introduce digital receipts. I wanted to go evangelize and tell people, you have to use this because it's the future. You don't see it, I see it, let me convince you. It's what drove me. It was my drug, to just be able to sell new ideas to people. And so when I sit down and think about it, and I think about the entrepreneurial world, I look at it as us entrepreneurs really have to think about it in different ways. What kind of entrepreneur are we? Are we an inventor? Are we an enabler? Or are we a disruptor? And I really believe in these three groups. And I've spent a lot of time with a lot of startups. If we can move to the next slide. And so when we think about, if you don't mind maybe closing that little window so they can see it. So if we think about inventors, they're the ones that create a whole new ecosystem. And we're talking about the television, the computer, the internet, the mobile phone. These are things that just basically were introduced. There was nothing like it, where then it created a whole new ecosystem around this particular invention. It's not something where you're saying it existed, so let me just improve it and do something better. It's something that just didn't exist before. When we move on to the next one, because I like to look at everything as the ecosystem, not necessarily just as the ecosystem, but also as the value chain, we look at enablers, and what I believe enablers are, they're here to connect 2 points within the value chain. That's like online payments. It allows you to be able to do e-commerce, right? It allows you to be able to provide your customers with new options of payments, etc. To take payments from people in other regions. And so then you have logistics, ad tech, customer support tools, and everything else. I see all of those as enablers. Now, when we move on to the next one and we have our disruptors, when I look at disruptors, I see them as they're there to improve and dominate an existing point within the value chain. An example you can look at is Facebook. Facebook I see as a disruptor. Because before Facebook, I remember we used to have MySpace. There was an app that was called Friendster. So it's not like they invented social media. It was already there. They just came and disrupted and dominated the market. If I look at M-Pesa, I find them to be a disruptor, because mobile payments existed in some form, but M-Pesa came and said, here's how you apply it. This is the audience you really need to go for with mobile payments. Mobile payments still hasn't taken off in the US because it's not the right audience for it. It's a different need. So this is basically the way I like to think about entrepreneurship. And so as an entrepreneur, we really need to think about what kind of entrepreneur we are. Where do we fall within the value chain? Where do we fall within this whole ecosystem? Because when we talk about the digital world, we can be wherever we want, right there. And so where do you sit within this value chain is becoming more and more important. But what we're realizing, when we look at Africa, how many inventions do we have really on the technology side? Have we really been able yet to create that new ecosystem that's creating all these other enablers and disruptors around it to allow us to really own that invention? We're not there yet. But when we think about it, what's important is not necessarily to be just an inventor or just to be a disruptor and enabler. What's important is to be an innovator. And you can be an innovator within every single one of these groups. And so when we look at the definition of innovation from Wikipedia, it's the practical implementation of ideas that result in the introduction of new goods or services or improvement in offering goods or services. If you just take that as an example, basically what we're saying is that innovation is allowing you to be different. When we look at a lot of startups, when you think about your startup, the first question I always ask when I talk to a startup is, what makes you different? Okay, you are another online payment. What makes you different? Don't tell me that you're just cheaper because anybody else can adjust their price. Tell me how. What is it that you're doing? What's your secret sauce for being so much cheaper in your transfer fees or whatever else it is? So I think that's the kind of thinking as entrepreneurs that we really need to be able to take. So if we can move on to the next. So to me, innovation is equal to vision. It's not about what you are today, it's where you're going in the future. As digital entrepreneurs, our job is to innovate. Innovation is at the core of every successful story that we have, and innovation makes things better for the future. So it's basically what needs to be the core message when we pitch our companies to any investor. The truth about the African startups, this is where we were, but I will get to the positives. Most startups are enablers, focused on capturing a portion of the market. So usually when you see a fintech company, they're an enabler, and they are basically really focusing on the market they're in. What made some of the other ones different is that they were able to expand into so many markets so quickly and have a vision that they could show people that this is a company that will grow very big. But what happened then is that we're still working on building the ecosystem and connecting the dots between all of these different disruptors, enablers, and inventors. The lack of tech inventions that disrupt the status quo slows our growth. And this slow the slow growth is actually creating a little bit of nervousness with some investors. So when investors look at our companies, they say, well, if you're just focusing on Senegal, if you're just focusing on Nigeria, it's too small of a market for me to be able to invest in because I don't know when I'm going to get my money back. And so this particular nervousness translates into smaller investments. And these smaller investments don't necessarily allow us to be able to move where we really want to move into. And so I think it's important that we look at this vicious cycle that we've been stuck in for quite a minute now, but then a lot of work has been being done within the ecosystems from the public sector, from the private sector. We're having venture funds that are being created. We have more and more entrepreneurs that are coming on board. And so when we look at where we are now, I say it only takes one. It takes one to break this cycle. And so when we look at fintech, and we look at the fintech example, the one that was able to break the cycle right now is an example that we all know about, which is Paystack, right? And so when we look at Paystack, it's the positive news about this is that enablers are starting to grow. They're becoming much bigger than just their own market. They're leading to more confidence in investors. Having these kinds of headlines in the news will make investors more comfortable to invest in more and more companies, which means more money will be going into the fintech sector, and therefore we'll be in a place where each of these companies, as they innovate, each of them needs to be able to innovate, which is where our challenge is. There's a lot more than even what's on this screen. There's a lot happening in the fintech industry. So when we say, why is fintech working? Because they were able to break the cycle. And this is the same cycle we need to break within all the other sectors, all the other enablers, all the other disruptors. So if you can move on to the next one. So the question that I ask, though, when we look at a transaction like the one from Paystack, could we look at this as the era of digital colonization? Because they were acquired by an American company. So Paystack is now an American company with the data being owned by Americans. And all of the money that's going to be made by Paystack today is going back to Stripe. So some people will ask this question. And it's a daring question to ask. And I think it's okay for us to have the conversation, how difficult it might be. Because what we need to be able to think about is what are the challenges in having such things happen in that kind of way. But I think there is a positive message behind that same headline. While we want to be concerned about the digital colonization, we also want to think about the beginning of a revolution. Because what this means now is that first we have two young entrepreneurs who have lots of money in their pockets that can now invest into other startups that are here based in Africa and then create their own, basically, success stories here in Africa. The second thing is we're going to be able to attract more money, which means we're going to hire more people. We can train more people. So I think there is a very positive message to this whole thing. What I do believe is that altogether, not just Africans, the whole world, as we look at Africa as the next big thing, that we all work together and make sure. I would like to ask, I have an ask for investors that are not African, that are not based in Africa, that where their accounts are not in Africa, to really look at the investments and say, if I make money with this company, I will pledge at least 50% of the money I made back into African countries. That's what's going to make us grow. But then I also want Africans to be able to take a look at it and to say, in Africa, for African, by Africans, towards the world. We need to invent, we need to enable, and we need to disrupt. So at this stage, I just want to go ahead and reintroduce myself, but this time with my little one who's been my inspiration. She's been my inspiration. She looks at every presentation I have. She watches every one of my speeches online and comes back and tells me what I'm saying and basically teaches me a lot. She just posted a TikTok video yesterday that apparently went viral, and she's telling me that now there's a way to make money out of that as well. So just to let you know that when we're doing what we're doing it for them. This is the future. Thank you very much. Thank you. So if we have any questions, we can get to that. No questions. Good.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Serene from Luca. And the question I had was mainly around the point where you were talking about having a lot of enablers and not enough disruptors. And pretty much if you could go deeper into the factors of why you think we don't have enough disruptors on the continent, aside from the fact that maybe due to maybe lack of resources, or lack of inspiration, or if there are more other factual things that really make that we don't have enough disruptors on the continent yet.
Sure, no, I appreciate that. What we see is that we do have, what happens is that we have one disruptor, like M-Pesa, and then it's a disruptor that is providing a service that enables. So sometimes there's some blurry lines between them, but they really truly became an enabler that turned into a disruptor. Then everybody tends to want to do the same thing. And because the path has been drawn, and as an entrepreneur, it's so hard to be an entrepreneur. This is my opinion, obviously, and anyone that wants to chime in could. But I also believe that because in Africa right now, the reason they enable us is because it's very difficult to think about something truly innovative and disruptive, a new invention, if you don't have the tools to build it. You see a lot of e-commerce platforms that turn into financing companies because they realize that the suppliers that they want to work with don't have enough funding, don't have a way to collect the money, et cetera, and so they have to then pivot, going from becoming an e-commerce platform to becoming a payment platform or becoming a logistics company. So I think it's just basically based on the current needs that we have in the country. Even myself, in looking at the B2B e-commerce platform, I'm looking for innovation in what I'm building, and I think we found it. I'm really excited about it, but at the same time, we're really an enabler. And we're having to go to the basics, all the way to training our suppliers on how to do packaging before they can sell their products. So I think it has to do with the fact that we're catching up, but we can do it very quickly. Thank you.
Do you think we're teaching our youth to think big enough? And if not, how can we do that?
Oh, wow. We're not necessarily thinking our youth how to be big enough yet. And the only reason I'm comfortable saying that is because the young entrepreneurs we have today, and I don't feel most of them are thinking big enough. As I mentioned, a lot of them are thinking about their own country. If you look at their financial projections, you sometimes feel like, wow, where is the dream here? I want you to sell me a dream, and to you as an entrepreneur to prove to me that you're able to execute on this dream. And so how can we do it? It's with headlines like this. It's really highlighting the success stories and not being afraid to tell what the numbers are. When people raise a lot of money, say this is how much you raise, so that people don't say, I just want to raise $50,000 because I don't think anybody will ever invest $200 million into my company. But if you see all the other ones around raising $5 million, $10 million, $100 million, now you will say, you'll feel more confident about, I think it has to do more also with the confidence thing. So I think we just need to be able to highlight and market what we're actually doing really well in Africa today. Yes, please.
I think that there is a golden middle. You know, I both agree and disagree.
Sure.
Because I think that on one hand, certainly it's important for entrepreneurs to be ambitious, know their self-worth, and not try to raise just 50K. I think that on the other hand, that it's possible to overdo it, as arguably many of the startups in US are doing. But I think it's just as dangerous for everyone to suddenly demand, you know, 10 or 20 or $50 million valuations just because, you know, of the paystack exits. I think overconfidence can also be detrimental to the longer-term health of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So I think we need to find the right balance between being not under-ambitious but not overly ambitious.
Absolutely agree. I think it's a great point. I think you don't want to be in a bubble. I've seen it happen. I lived in San Francisco when the bubble was real. And it's not like where I had a friend who raised $50 million off of a PowerPoint presentation. To me, that's a bubble. Obviously, the company didn't work. so I think what it is, that's the reason you have stages of funding. That's why you start with a friends and family, and you go with this particular amount with that. And there's this particular type of investor that invests into friends and family, which is $5,000, $10,000 until you can get to $25,000. Then you go into your series seed, where you might raise $500,000, and then you move on to the next one, and you raise, you know, your $2 million. I'm not saying you raise it all on the same day or based on the PowerPoint presentation. What I'm saying is that you at least need to give the investor this feeling that they will get their money back and that they can get it back 5x, because they need to have some returns as well. So, and also for you to be able to see your company, doesn't matter if you reach it. I remember when I was launching the music recognition application, people would say, investors never saw it. And I finally understood why. They would always tell me, is this a company or is this a feature? Is this a company or is this a feature? They never saw it as a real company, because I was so excited about the product. That's what I would talk about. I was not necessarily interested in showing big numbers in terms of the potential. And one of the things that I also realized is, for me, what was driving me, and that's what always drives me actually with all of my startups, is just, I just wanted to meet one random person that would tell me that they used my application and that they were happy about it. And the day I got an email from a woman thanking me for music recognition because her husband was deaf, so couldn't hear music, but he could feel the music, he could feel the vibrations from the music, and she thanked me because finally he could use music recognition to tell what was playing, and he could tell her what music he really wanted to hear. And that brought tears to my eyes, that email. But that's when I sat down and I said, I'm done. I did it. Anything that comes after that, I'm happy. So I think thinking big is more about the future, but then you have to take it step by step and know what you're in it for. It can't be the money. It has to be basically something, it has to be the passion. Can we take one more question? We have one more hand raised. Yes.
Well, first of all, thank you for your enthusiasm. It's always nice to hear so much positivity in something that is so unreliable, because there is no guarantee that you will win or you will fail. And you got to build up your confidence before you move forward. That said, I'm not sure that the valuation is really the key to success here. In many ways, I think the challenge that we have here in Africa, and especially you, I believe you spend a lot of time in the States, where, you know, we believe there's no frontier. You know, if a valuation today is for $1 billion, it could be tomorrow for $1 trillion. Who's to say it's too big? You know, it's, leave it up to your imagination. At the end of the day, what matters is, are you going to do it or not? And somebody is going to follow your steps. But in Africa, even when we do something extremely well, we have a tendency to devaluate it. We think, okay, it's in Africa, it's not that great after all. We have to wait until it happens the same way somewhere else, and we say, oh, that was genius. You know? And even when we win, we think we failed. You know, we're very easy at sharing a failure. A success, very, very hard. And I think this is maybe where we need to change our ways. We need to believe. And I think if you have any ways to help us, you know, in Africa, you know, be less timid and more, you know,
I'm trying.
It's
a cultural thing.
I don't care what you think. I don't think if it's too cheap, that's your problem. But this is what I'm going for. And when it works, everything else is history, right? So that's my opinion.
No, it's a great point, and I appreciate it, and I think you've said it all. The entrepreneurs that I do work with will tell you that I'm very tough with them when it comes to their projections and making sure that their numbers are realistic. But if you push the numbers and they're too small and they still remain small, then maybe you're just not in the right business. And figure out how you can change your business, pivot, or do something else that will actually give you the success that you need because you're investing so much into it. On the positive side, like I said, in terms of what to do, I don't think there's a secret to it. I think it's a cultural thing, so it will take years to be able to change it. But I think what America does well is marketing. that's what they do well. It doesn't mean taking it to the level where it's false marketing or where you're selling a dream that will never happen, but it is celebrating the successes and not just going in, as I talked about, maybe looking at some of these acquisitions from international companies becoming a potential digital colonization, looking at the positive side as well and focusing on that and finishing with that conversation. So I think that's really what we need to be able to do moving forward. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it, and hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you, Biram. I'm a big fan of yours. So we are going to proceed for lunch. It's a wrap for the first half of the day. And so we'll be back here by 1:45 p.m. And so have a nice lunch. See you. Same place as yesterday. Near the pool on the right.